how to fly a drone using math and instinct. This time on Hak5.
Hello and welcome to Hak5. My name is Darren Kitchen.
My name is Shannon Morse.
Aloha.
Yeah, apparently. Right? You're very decked out in aloha gear.
It was like
from Hawaii.
Right.
Yeah. Darren disappeared for the weekend to Hawaii, of all places. Aren't you, Mr. Fancy
I needed to learn about flight, specifically what we're going to be talking about today.
Went to Hawaii?
Because we are going to be taking our multi-rotor into the sky here soon, as we've been building in this series, and now it's time to talk about binding our controllers, which we're going to do in just a bit. But before we do that, because we need to understand how our controller is going to affect the quadcopter, we need to get a little bit of theory going on. Not too much, but just enough to understand the basics.
And I'm going to mention, by the way, because you've probably noticed, this is not the same drone.
No, we're using this.
This is not the drone you are looking for.
So we're going to use this quadcopter as an example. It has its props on. It's obviously turned off. There's no batteries. And we're going to talk about how quadcopters are going to fly. But in order for us to understand that, we're going to need to know how airplanes fly.
Airplanes?
Because...
But those are different. They go one way.
Yes, but we're talking about an RC hobby that started with model aircraft, as in airplanes.
Yeah, yep, okay.
And that has stayed the same. So all of the controls are made for airplanes. In fact, when we bind it, we're going to be in airplane mode as opposed to helicopter mode.
Really?
Yes.
But helicopters are so much more similar to drones than airplanes.
Well, they share some similarities, but when it comes to the actual controls, we're going to be using airplane stuff.
Okay, so what's the similarities here?
Well, we first need to understand that airplanes fly. I've done this before. I totally remember how to do this. You put this guy over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you bring these guys in.
Yeah.
Yes.
There you go.
Well, there you go. Okay. So
nicely done.
So airplanes fly because they go fast and have wings, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what the go fast does, that's the thrust, and what that's doing is it's allowing the wings to generate lift, and the lift counteracts the force of drag, which is being imposed on it by the wind, as it were, simplified.
Yeah. Okay.
And, da-na-na-na,
it's so beautiful. Can I fly it?
Please, yes, do that.
Oh, well, it didn't go very far, but at least it flew, kind of, sort of.
And so our go forward is going to be made by our thrust.
Yeah.
And in the case of an airplane, that's going to inherently allow it to do lift, as opposed to the drag and all of that good stuff.
Okay.
But we need to talk a little bit about all of the different ways in which it actually moves.
Okay.
So, for instance, we have different controls on our airplane that are going to allow us to do different things as far as what we call yaw or pitch or roll. And that's kind of what we need to get into, because we're going to be doing the same thing with our quadcopter.
Okay.
So if we wanted to roll, which is this movement right here, what we'd need to do is affect our ailerons.
Ailerons?
Ailerons, right? Which are on the ends of the wings, which allow us to kind of do this motion, right?
Oh.
As opposed to if we wanted to go side to side, if we wanted to yaw, as it's called, we need to affect our rudder, which there would be a tail here with a rudder on it, right? And that will allow us to go side to side. Similarly, if this was like a commercial airliner and we had elevators on the end of the tail wing, we would have elevators. And so those elevators would allow us to change our pitch, which allows us to do that up and down motion.
Okay.
And it's very much the same in terms of quadcopters, how that works.
Okay.
So for instance, our hover, right, is quite literally just going to be equal amounts of thrust to all four propellers.
Yeah, that makes sense, because you want to stay in one place when you're hovering.
Right, and so in a perfect world, just imagine that everything is exactly equal here, and we give equal thrust to each of these spinning rotors. And notice that these rotors spin clockwise, and these
spin the other way.
These spin counterclockwise, right?
Which we set up last week with our firmware.
Right. And by actually swapping, in the case of the physical,
swapping the wires.
We had to swap the wires to make sure that that would work.
Okay.
So the pitch and our roll are actually applied by just varying the thrust that's applied to those motors. So if the white side of this is the forward direction of this quadcopter here, and we wanted to pitch forward, so we would go forward, quite simply we would give more thrust to the rear
those, but you would
rotors.
slow down these, right?
Slow down those ever so slightly. And the more that we give more thrust to these and less thrust to those, the more we affect our pitch. And the more we affect our pitch, the more we affect the speed of our forward flight.
Okay, gotcha.
So that's pretty simple. So you imagine, if you wanted to, pitch or roll in one direction, side to side, forward and back, that's how you do that.
Okay.
Well, then how do you yaw, which is to rotate like this?
You would slow down these and then speed up these?
That's actually exactly
Is that correct?
That is correct, right? Because it's these are going to have because these are going counterclockwise. They have a force on the aircraft that's exactly opposite of your clockwise ones. And so when you give, if we gave 60% of the thrust to these and 40% of the thrust to those, we would actually get our side-to-side motion.
So it would still keep you level, but you're going to move to that motion.
Exactly.
To that side.
So if we wanted to stay at the same amount of overall thrust, we would just divide up how much we're giving to each.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Cool.
And so quadcopters are very simple in that sense because, that's it. You only have 4 moving parts. Right?
And that's it.
Right, as opposed to a helicopter, as I just recently learned on Oahu, that they are much more complicated with their variable pitch rotors, with their swash plates, with their, you notice on like a helicopter, right?
Yeah.
In all of those action movies, when the helicopter gets hit by the missile and it
it starts spinning and then it crashes into something.
Well, why does it spin? Right?
Because the tail one gives out, or the main one gives out.
Yeah. So the tail rotor on the end of the boom at the back, that's there causing an opposite force to counteract the rotation of that main blade. So similar to that, which is exactly why all of these aren't clockwise, because otherwise all this thing would do is spin, right? So by having 2 clockwise and 2 counterclockwise, we're doing very similar to what you have on a helicopter with that boom.
Oh, interesting.
But as opposed to more complex aircraft like a helicopter or a tricopter, you don't need special equipment to be able to vary the pitch of the blades or anything or actually physically move them with actuators and stuff or a complicated swash plate. So these are very simple, just motors with a propeller screwed onto it. Super, super simple.
Well, I'm assuming that it does make it easier since it's 4, so it's very easy to divide by 2s.
Exactly, and that's why when it comes to quadcopters, or multi-rotors in general, we end up with typically an even amount of blades or rotors. So we would have, the next up from a quadcopter would be a hexcopter, right? So you would have 3 counterclockwise and 3 clockwise, or a octocopter. So you would have 4 and 4, and so on and so forth. And there's various different configurations. You can actually have an octocopter that's still 4 arms, and then you have them underneath, counter-rotating the opposite direction on the same exact boom.
Cool.
So there's lots of cool different configurations, but the quadcopters are the simplest designs. And with that brief understanding of how this is going to be very similar to that. So if we wanted to change our yaw on our airplane, changing our yaw on our quadcopter is going to do the exact same thing.
Oh, that's so cool.
And thankfully the flight controller is going to handle all of the math for us, but we need to make it easy for our thumbs or our fingers when holding the controls to have the instinct. And so in just a moment, we're going to talk about the configuration of the transmitter and get comfortable with the controls and how they're going to affect that aircraft so we can fly tomorrow.
So now we're going to do math.
Maybe.
Okay.
Stay tuned. Imagine a coconut you could put a SIM card in and have a rotary dial and make a cell phone call anywhere in the world. That, my friend, is a great idea. And when you have a great idea, you need an amazing domain name to go with it. And there's no better place to get those than domain.com. They've been our friends for years, supporting Hak5. And you know what? Shannon and I love them. Whenever we have great ideas, we head over to domain.com and use their amazing domain discovery system to get a reliable, affordable, and easy to use domain that's up and running in no time. And you know what? You can tweet at domain.com and say, hey, thanks for supporting Hak5 for so many years. They have such brilliant ideas with their coconuts. And when you think domain names, think domain.com and use that coupon code HAK5 because they have that special discount just for you. It's 15% off. And when you think domain names, think domain.com.
We're now back and we're going to talk about transmitters.
Hooray.
And amazing crowns.
I think the Hexacopter looks good on you.
Me too.
Yes, it's part of the spring lineup.
I'm like a sunshine on a rainy day. Sorry.
Okay, you're gonna be flying these, so I'm gonna need to show you all about the transmitters. I know you've played with like hub sands before, so some of this may be review.
You realize it's a really bad idea to tell me to fly these, right? I'm a bad driver.
No, I'm gonna teach you to be a good driver. But we're gonna need to understand a few things about the various transmitters. I have a few here. So this one right here is from Orange RX. That's kind of like
the orange one?
Yes.
Okay.
Then we have a Spectrum DX8.
Okay.
This right here is a Devo 7E, which I love because I've got some cool open source firmware on it. And then that's another Spectrum, and I forget, it's integrated by eFlight, but basically it's another Spectrum. And you can see all of these do the exact same thing. Essentially, some have more bells and whistles than others, but they all take care of those basics of flight that we were talking about.
They both have up and downs and side to side.
Now, where those up and downs are depend on what we call the modes of the transmitter. And so there are 4 common modes. They're just called mode 1, 2, 3, and 4. And in North America, and actually it's more and more prevalent throughout the world now, you'll find mode 2. I just want to put that out there because when you're getting yourself a transmitter for the very first time, get a mode 2.
Mode 2,
unless you're like in China where they all fly mode 1 or 3 or something else, you know, talk to your buddies, who else is flying what, but from what I understand, most prevalent throughout the world is mode 2.
So does that match up with the receiver that you have on your drone?
Actually, it's not going to matter.
Oh.
It just affects the placement of the sticks and what this and this do.
Okay, so that's why you want to get mode 2 because that's the most common one that you would find in the US.
Right, so in mode 2, it looks a little bit like this. So this is a mode 2 transmitter and we have a stick on the left and a stick on the right. The stick on the left, you'll notice, allows me to
up and down.
Well, it allows me to put this stick anywhere I want and let go and it'll stay there. But on the right stick, if I put it all the way down and let go, it jumps back to the middle, right? It's kind of springy. The same thing happens with left and right on that stick, but the up and down. And the reason for that is this would be the exact opposite of a mode 1, where these two would be swapped. And actually in some transmitters, you can even just go ahead and like open them up, unscrew all of these. I mean, it's made to be done, and then swap them, and then you can like change jumper settings or something.
Are we going to be doing all that?
No, because all of mine are mode 2.
Sweet. Okay.
Yes, and so let's just go ahead and walk through what these various things do. So on the left, in a mode 2 controller, which is what you should be having if you're watching this, is your throttle, right? And that's why I'm able to put it all the way up and leave it there. So as I increase this, what it's doing is, and we'll talk more about the protocol later, but what it's doing is it's telling the aircraft, hey, spin faster.
So this will just keep raising up higher and higher and higher.
Right, and then if I do that, well, it'll cut the throttle completely.
And then it'll go crash to the ground.
Which is kind of nice. Normally you wear like a lanyard. I like to use my DEF CON badge ones. And so if I were to put the stick...
He looks like a huge dork when he does it too. It's so funny.
If you want to be a huge dork, keep watching Hak5. Which is why I like, you know, I can put the throttle right there in the middle and then let go. And if I'm wearing this and I need to use my left hand for anything, it's okay. It's not going to fall and crash down to the earth.
I take back my dork comment. It makes sense now.
See, there's reasons for all this. The other thing that the left stick will actually do is moving this side to side is going to affect our rudder. And so as we talked about, what our rudder is going to do is going to allow us to change our yaw,
right.
which means that we're actually, so if I move this stick to the left, the aircraft will continue moving to the left until I let go.
Okay.
Now that's why it jumps back to the center, because when I let it go, I want it to, it doesn't snap back. It's not like holding it to the left and holding it to the right, and then when you let go, it recenters. It's that as you hold it to the left, it will continuously rotate to the left until you let go, and then it stops rotating to the left.
So in the case of your drone, when you're turning this from right to left, it's making either your counterclockwise ones or your clockwise ones, depending on which way, right or left, turns so that this turns.
Exactly.
Okay,
yeah.
got it.
So then that brings us to the right. So now we understand that the left stick, all that's going to do is allow us to increase and decrease our throttle and change our rudder. It's not an actual physical rudder, but it allows us to adjust our yaw.
So you're not going backwards and forwards yet?
No.
You're not racing this thing. You're just finding your center of gravity, basically.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so to change, oh man, wait until we get to CG. Center of gravity is so important to the balance of these.
Yeah.
Now to go forward and back, we change our pitch, which on a airplane is done with an elevator. We're not an airplane, but the control is still called the elevator.
Oh.
So that brings us to the right stick, which is when I push this forward or pull it back, it is going to change our elevator, which is going to change the pitch. And because of that variable thrust, it's going to have that forward momentum or its backwards momentum.
Okay.
And when I let go of it, so this is actually really nice. If I say I want to go forward a little bit, I push it forward, right? I can either dumb thumb it or I can pinch it. I'm a pincher. You're either one or the other. I do this. It's personal preference. But if I push this forward, it's going to tilt forward. It's going to go forward. And then when I let go, it's going to recenter. And if we've calibrated everything well, then the craft will also recenter.
Oh, gotcha.
And then, of course, depending on our flight controller, it may drift, it may try to lock in using various other sensors. It really depends on.
And that's very customizable in the firmware, right?
That's the whole idea.
Okay.
And we're going to be using firmware that's specifically made for well, it's kind of general purpose, but it's more prevalent in the racing community.
Cool.
So it's less so, it can do some automation stuff, but if you're looking for automation, APM might be a better flight controller.
Okay.
It's like choosing Linux distros.
Right, yeah.
Right. But with that said, the only one left, of course, is now changing our pitch, which you might imagine the only thing left on this controller is moving the right stick left and right. So when I push this to the left, the craft goes to the left. When I let go, it recenters. Hopefully the craft will recenter. That also depends on how we've set up our flight controller and the rates, and we'll get into rates later, but essentially there's ways that you can choose how we want the aircraft to respond to the sticks. But for all intents and purposes, you have throttle, rudder, elevators, and ailerons, which affect your go, your go, your yaw, your pitch, and your roll.
Okay, so let's say I'm one of those weird people that are playing on a Nintendo and I'm like, oh, I don't like, using B to jump or whatever. Can I change these two in the settings, or do I have to buy a mode 1 controller instead, or a mode 4 or something? You
would have to buy one. Very few controllers allow you to.
Unless I broke it open, of course.
Well, even then, very few controllers actually let you swap. So it's mainly found in the more expensive ones. In the cheaper models, there'll be typically 2 SKUs. I say modes, there's 1 through 4, but in my experience, I've really only found for sale modes 1 and modes 2.
Gotcha.
And so, well, I guess now that I say that, RC Logger has some room. Anyway, buy the one that's specific to you, and we're just going to leave it at learn mode 2, because if you learn,
well, mode 2 is the one I'm familiar with.
You know, it's funny, we've been using this analogy talking about learning to fly and the different motorcycles, if this were learning to ride for the first time. If you were learning to ride for the first time, I would not tell you to get a motorcycle where the clutch is on the right and the brake is on the left, which those old British motorcycles had, because that's inverse of the norm today.
Oh gosh, that would cause some wrecks.
Guess was popularized by the Japanese motorcycles when the invasion and the whole anyway, look up the CB750, it's a gorgeous bike. point is you don't want to learn the wrong thing.
Right.
Because you want to be able to get on any motorcycle and be able to ride it.
Of course.
And that's why we're talking about quadcopters in a very generic sense in this series.
So what comes next?
Well, what comes next is, okay, so we understand the sticks. There's a few other elements, right? We have switches, we have dials, we have these little push buttons. So let's talk through some of those.
Okay.
Maybe we can see better on the orange one?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think we can. Okay, cool. So on the orange RX, you'll notice that we have these little buttons to the left and right and below the different clips, or the different controls. And what those do, those are called your trims. And so what a trim does is allow you to make ever so slight adjustments. It's actually very similar to on an aircraft. You have the same kind of concept that you can trim a plane.
Yeah. Because no two drones are going to be perfectly exactly the same.
Right, and in different wind conditions, there may be a reason to have. It really depends. The thing about it is, what I say, generally speaking, is don't get too involved in the trim, right? Because what'll happen is, if you're, starting out like in your house with a little hub sand toy or something, and you notice that it's going ever so slightly to the left, then what you'll do is, so if this is your pitch to the left, then what you'll do is you'll hit this trim button to the right a few clicks, and what that'll do is it'll counteract it, right? So it'll change where the center point. So you can, we're going to say this is 1024.
Okay.
This is 512, and that is 0, right? Just pretend. Okay, so what will happen is, if we were to trim this a little to the right, instead of this being 512, it might now be 500. It might now be 486,
okay.
right? And by changing that midpoint, we're helping to affect any potential drift, and that drift may be caused by a unbalance in the center of gravity. You might have a heavy piece of equipment, like if I have
like a camera
or a transmitter. Yeah, exactly. So by changing your trim, if you know that you're a little front heavy, you can counteract that a little bit by just trimming it back a little.
Okay.
That's what those are for. They're not for fixing glaring mistakes in your build, because you're losing resolution in one direction or another when you do that.
Gotcha. Okay.
And the other thing to keep in mind is, you can sit there trimming until the cows come home, getting it just perfect so that when you let go of your right stick, that it doesn't pitch forward or roll.
It doesn't like slightly go forward, just a little bit.
You could be there forever getting that perfect, and you know what's going to happen? You're going to get out in the wind, and the wind's going to do its thing. And at a certain point, the math doesn't matter. It's going to come down to instinct.
Okay.
So when I pick up a quadcopter, I'll trim it just to make sure that what I usually do is set everything to the center point.
Yeah.
And then I get a feel for it, and then unless something is like drastically to one direction or another, and normally it's forward and back and not left and right. Left and right, you don't want a lot of variation in your center of gravity. But I'll trim it back a little bit, but if it's too far off, I'm more interested in fixing the quadcopter than fixing the trim.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Kind of like operating systems.
Yes. So then that brings us to the switches.
Okay.
So you'll notice, in addition to our regular controls here and our trims, which we now understand, we have a couple of switches. In fact, on this we have many switches.
That looks complicated.
Yeah, it's not actually. It really just depends on the aircraft and what we have them set up to do.
Okay.
Typically, and this brings up the concept of channels. And before we can even understand the switches, we need to understand
like radio channels?
No. Actually, channels as in, they're called channels. What's happening when I'm pushing this throttle forward or changing my pitch is I'm sending a signal. Remember I said like this is 1024 and this would be 0? I'm actually sending that over a channel over the radio, and so this is constantly picking up.
I just said radio channels.
Well, kind of though, because they're not like separated frequencies, but it's part of the bit stream that it's sending. But within the bit stream, you set it up into logical channels.
Oh, okay.
Right, so it's not necessarily like 2.4156 is the aileron and 2.4157 is the elevator. That's not exactly how it works, but essentially within that stream.
It's sending a packet stream.
Yeah, it's sending essentially a digital stream of data. Okay. It actually, when you turn it on, it's just whatever its rate is set to, whether it's 1,024 times a second.
Right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Whatever its baud rate is set to, it's sending that so many times a second.
Okay.
And it's saying, hey, this is the position of my throttle. This is the position of my elevator. This is the position of my aileron, and all of those things. And each of these packets are incremented, and then it's always looking for the latest packet. If it drops a packet, it's like no big deal. If it drops like 50 packets, then you've got a problem, and then your fail-safes kick in, and then the aircraft will do some predefined thing like cut its throttle and fall to the ground safely.
Like what happens when you do a man-in-the-middle attack on your drone.
We're not quite to hacking these yet, but there's lots of fun ahead. Some of these protocols, in fact, are very simple. That said, so you're changing the values of those different channels, and we'll have to map those different channels and say like, oh, well, channel 1 on the transmitter is my throttle channel on the quadcopter. So it knows, all it knows is, hey, I'm receiving, the quadcopter, the flight controller, when it's got its little receiver there and it's getting signals from the remote, all it knows is I'm getting a bunch of data, I'm getting a bunch of values for each of these channels, right? So, it knows channel 1 is at 1024, which the question becomes, well, if that's this, then that makes sense. If my throttle is all the way up, sure.
Yeah.
If the throttle is the first channel.
Oh.
If the aileron is the first channel, then instead of this,
it's going to be doing something else.
Right, which is why you have to do channel mapping.
Oh.
But it brings us to the numbers of channels. Okay.
How many channels are there?
Well, there can be as many as you want, right?
Really?
Yeah. I
Cool.
mean, so the more complex the aircraft, the more channels there possibly may
that
be.
makes sense. All right.
The very basics, what we've been talking about so far, we've only been talking about 4 channels, which is what this exact remote does. This is a Spectrum 4-channel remote. So, we've got our throttle, our yaw, our pitch, and our roll, right? Well, what if you have additional functionality that we want to employ in your quadcopter? Say you have a camera on a servo and you want to be able to pitch the camera up and down.
Oh, yeah, good point.
What if you want to be able to set a beeper, right? This is what I actually use. Like we put on that little speaker.
Oh, I think I get it. So what you're doing with these switches is you're changing the channel of the remote so that your main controls will do something else.
Exactly.
Is that it?
Exactly.
Cool.
So typically the next step up from your very basic 4-channel, which is only going to get you your basics of flight, you have the next step up, which would be, in this case, a 6-channel. Or you can even go all the way up to an 8-channel. This is a DX8. And we have not just our 4 channels here, but there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then some dials and everything. So, that's actually an 8-channel.
This is hardcore.
Yeah, you can really, but what you typically find is your throttle, elevator, aileron, and rudder, and then your gear and an auxiliary. So they'll even be labeled. You'll find that there's a label
This
over
one's
there.
labeled.
Yeah, and so somewhere on there it will say gear,
rudder,
aux1, aux2, things of that nature.
Flaps,
right? Again, we're talking about airplanes here, but we're going to just assign those different channels to different stuff. That's a fun one.
Okay, cool.
So this remote, by the way, this is the one that I fly with every day. I love this remote. This is a 6-channel TX, as we call it, or transmitter, and it's the Devo 7E. I mention that because the Devention series of transmitters, as you can see, this is very small, and yet has the same functionality as this much larger one.
Yeah.
You can put open source software on it that makes it do additional functionality. And as you can see from lots of that stuff, I've
totally hacked it.
I've done a little bit of hacking. So the different channels, in this case, this is a 6-channel. I only have this switch over here and that switch over there. Okay. My gear and my auxiliary 1. That's what they're called, but they're just channels and we can map them to different stuff. Okay. So this one, for instance, I use that to toggle on and off the beeper. The reason for that is when I crash in the woods and I don't know where I landed, I like to be able to flip the switch and then I can hear the quadcopter and run over to it.
That's a good point.
The other one might change my flight mode, and we're going to get into the different rates, but it might put me in a very acrobatic rate versus a much more calmed and relaxed rate where the autopilot kicks in more.
So one for photography, one for racing.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
That's kind of the idea there.
Okay.
So there you go. There are your sticks. There are your trims. There are your basic 4 elements there. Your TAR, or AETR, this is your throttle, aileron, rudder, and the other thing I said. Should probably do that again, but and then you may also have dials.
Okay.
And so this one has a dial.
That one has a dial.
Yeah, so you can see that right there. It's nice because this, when you put it into a position, you can just leave it there and it's not going to flip back. It's not like a one-way or a three-way switch.
Okay.
All of these switches are changing the bit values of a channel.
Okay.
So typically anywhere between 0 and 2048 or 0 and 1024.
Yeah.
Nice thing about a dial is you can rotate this dial from 0 to say 512 and then let go and leave it there. Versus a two-way switch may only be either 0 or 2048 or
Gotcha.
0 and 1024.
Okay.
So the reason you might want a dial is, remember I mentioned that camera?
Mm-hmm.
If you have a camera on a gimbal, instead of looking straight down or straight up, you might want to be able to vary where it is. And so you would assign that channel to that gimbal.
Okay.
What else? What else? Protocols, frequencies. We are going to be talking about spectrum. There's also a couple of the other manufacturers out there like Futaba and JR and a few others that have different protocols.
I love these names.
I know, right?
They're so weird.
But Spectrum in particular uses the 2.4 gigahertz frequencies, which is unlicensed spectrum, so you don't need to go out and get your ham ticket to use these.
Cool.
They also speak either DSM-X or DSM-2 protocol. It's not rude. They could do a whole episode on those protocols, and we may when we start hacking these. Otherwise, other than protocols and frequencies, you really just have range. And your range is dependent on a number of factors similar to Wi-Fi range. But one of the biggest ones that'll affect it is your antenna and your transmitter output power.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So, for instance, this is what we call a low-range transmitter. This is like a toy.
Yeah.
And it comes with like a toy learner aircraft, right? And it's a good, like what we call a park flyer, something that you can just fly around a ball field, but not very far because then you're going to lose range. I say that, Shannon, but you'll notice something that was not stock on this.
Wait, is that RP SMA or?
Actually,
the other one?
It is. Okay. Oh, no, it's SMA.
It's SMA? Okay.
Oh, speaking of which, yeah, it's just like Wi-Fi. Like half the gear in this hobby is RP SMA, the other half of the gear is SMA. It's so frustrating.
So irritating.
So grab yourself a bag of adapters. You'll probably notice that there are a few on this.
Wow.
But this one has been upgraded a little bit just by increasing the antenna. There was like a 2 dBi antenna on this, and I've upgraded it with a 5 dBi antenna. I get a little bit more range out of it.
Yeah.
It's not a whole lot, but this is a very low power transmitter, as opposed to something like the Spectrum DX8. This is what you would call a full range transmitter. So I've successfully gotten 2 kilometers out on this, no problem.
That's awesome.
Right? That was before the regulations were imposed about line of sight, and that regulation, by the way, is visual line of sight unaided. So you can't be there with a set of binoculars. So yeah, there's the restrictions are just coming in. And anyway, so that's full range.
Okay.
And then you can even, like, if you wanted to, I mean, it's out there, but I have one that'll do different frequencies. You can get crazy amount of range on these.
Oh, that's
depending on the
awesome.
output power and the frequencies.
Yeah.
But typically on 2.4, I suggest everybody get a full range transmitter. This DX8 is expensive. It's 8 channels, and you're not. It may be too much controller at first.
Oh, okay.
That said, do not pick up the cheapest toy controller either. I highly recommend when you get into this.
So are we going to use this one? Or something like it?
Yeah, I'm going to be using this one just because I'd love to talk to you guys about the open source firmware and some of the hacks and stuff. This is actually a toy, but it's a nicer toy remote, which is why it's small.
Yeah.
And it's a short-range transmitter. However, it has been modified in such a way that it now does the same range as this.
Oh,
and as you can see, it's much lighter and smaller in my bag.
Awesome.
And that means I can travel more with it. So I like that. I would recommend everybody start with at least a 6-channel transmitter. And that's why I show the orange, because this orange TX, it's by Hobby King, it's sometimes iffy, but I like this particular transmitter, and it's almost as full feature as a DX6
Okay.
which would be the next model down from this.
Cool.
And that's just a good one to get started on. So you will grow into a transmitter. There's no reason to go off and get like, you know, a $1,000 transmitter, which you can. But
have fun with that.
But the ground equipment, which I guess is what we're talking about, it's anything that doesn't fly. If it's not flying, it's not crashing. If it's not crashing, it's not breaking. And if you are crashing your transmitter, you're doing it wrong.
Aw.
I know, right?
That's really sad.
So maybe I am crashing my transmitters. So that's that. The next step is really to bind and fly, and that's what we're going to be doing next week, because we've got to break out the laptop. We've got everything wired up. I know, right? But I need you to understand that when you do that and you leave it there, it's going to go up and keep going up until you pull that back down.
I realize. Thank you very much.
So anyway, that is a little bit of theory on remotes. I hope you found this information helpful. I just wanted to get a little bit of brief theory in before we go out and start flying.
Yeah,
because that's what we'll do.
It's probably wise.
That's what we'll do next week. We're going to bind, going to set up our satellite receiver in serial mode. You're going to see how these affect it in the software before we put on propellers. We're going to tune PIDs very briefly. Okay. And then we're going to start doing things like walking the dog.
Yay, I'm so excited I get to walk a dog. I've always wanted one.
Yeah?
Can I put like a dog costume on my drone? And then walk it.
You could.
That would be so amazing.
I think I was Hak5 where I saw that somebody had like embalmed a cat.
What?
And made it into a quadcopter.
Oh
so
gosh,
Fluffy
that's just kind of awkward and sick.
Fluffy died and now continue. People are weird.
That's super weird.
That's okay. Well, anyway.
Anyway.
Yes.
Moving on.
Moving on.
We like sharing our stickers whenever we get stickers in the mail, and we just had a pen test with Hak5, and we got a thank you note from the. I'm not going to read this note because it's personal, but he says best regards from the cookie delivery guy. You know who you are. And he also sent along a sticker from his company that he is a part of.
Skinny Research and Development.
Yeah,
so check that out.
We'll stick that up on the wall.
Yeah, I'm just going to put that right here.
Darren has also provided an old school Yazaga sticker.
Hang on, I actually just wanted, I was about to put it in, then I want to make sure I get the orientation correct.
Oh, there you go.
Put that guy right there.
Nice.
Yes. Oh, that's a fun one. I found this cleaning up. This is the...
That's great. That's old school Yazaga. And we got a couple of oatmeal stickers, which I'll get ready for you, Darren.
All right, thank you.
That's awesome. So we love stickers. You can always send over your stickers if you have something you want to promote, or if you just have something awesome that you want us to stick on the back of our studio set. We're more than happy to accept, and we'll put the link or the address down below so you can check it out.
There you go.
Yay.
Good stuff. Hey, thanks so much, guys, for supporting the show. Another way you can find out how, in addition to, of course, liking and subscribing and all of that good stuff, is to head over to hakshop.com. That's where we run this independently. You okay?
Yeah, I had an itch.
Okay.
Sorry.
If you would like to, I would say if you would like to support this show so it can get more professional, but there's no excuse for her.
No. Never.
hakshop.com is where you can support us directly. We have awesome fun tools that we develop in-house, like the Wi-Fi Pineapple, the Land Turtle, the USB Rubber Ducky, and you can learn more about those over there. What else is going on with you, with all your other shows? Oh,
yes. So we have a whole bunch of different shows. You can find them all at hak5.org. They're all on the main page. Just scroll down and you will find them. We're doing Tech Thing every week. We got ThreatWire. Thank you so much to everybody who supports ThreatWire over on patreon.com/ThreatWire. We're aiming towards our next goals. We can afford our own RSS because apparently those are kind of expensive if you want a decent one.
CDNs are fun.
Yeah.
Also,
we're working
Metasploit
on those.
Minute.
Metasploit Minute, yes.
Yeah,
so Mubik's just recorded the next season. Super stoked to watch that, and he's also supported on Patreon, so thank you to everybody for that.
Don't forget Hak5.
Yep, Hak5 just came back. We got a new sponsor for Hak5, so we're going to keep that show going as long as possible, and I'm super excited. YouTube.com/Hak5.
Yes. If you're not already there, hit subscribe, scroll down, you'll find all sorts of good stuff. In fact, check out the playlist. There's a bunch of good stuff. If you're not into the drone stuff, but you're like, hey, software-defined radio floats my boat, head over there. You'll find all sorts of good things.
I made all the playlists. You're welcome.
10 years. Much love to everybody who has supported us over those last 10, and we look forward to continuing this on. With that,
Playlists take a long time to create when you have over 1,000 videos on your channel.
As it turns out. With that, I'm Darren Kitchen.
I'm Shannon Morse.
Trust your technolust.
Trust your technolust.
How to fly a drone using math and instinct.
It's like dinosaurs. Instinct.
This is what I have to deal with.
I'm a velociraptor.
If you want to host this, let me know.
Okay.
It's a good look for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, you should just rock that. I say we strap it to your head with some Velcro. We get some propellers going, and you just. No, you're supposed to do the luau thing with.
Oh, I can't luau with this on my head. Are you kidding? I can barely luau on my own.
Shannon Morse with a grass skirt. Next on Hak5.
Ah, you wish.